Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. It seems like no matter what is going on in the news or what's in our headline, whether it's Iran, Lebanon, the Gulf, the rocky relationship between Israel and the United States, conversations around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict always seem to end up with a discussion of the two-state solution. Is it viable? But even as those arguments are taking place, the ideologically driven far-right settler movement in Israel is doing all that it can to turn the reality on the ground in the West Bank into one in which a two-state solution is impossible. And for now more than 3 years, Israel's ruling government coalition has had members of that movement in the most senior, influential positions possible, allowing them to really shape the future and the vision of the West Bank. A new Haaretz investigation is shining a light on the latest push to create a large-scale settler and IDF presence in the West Bank in the heart of the Palestinian population, where very little Israeli presence had existed before. They're taking advantage of their grip on power, the far-right settlers, and the national atmosphere following October 7th and the Gaza war to do so. Here with me in the studio to discuss exactly what the Haaretz investigative team turned up and to explain it is a member of that team, Haaretz correspondent Yarden Michaeli. Yarden Michaeli, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Allison.
Yarden, your investigative piece describes in detail a true transformation of a key part of the West Bank deep inside the Palestinian population there. You report that settlers, the IDF, Israel, the mechanisms of the Israeli state are taking control of 18 strategic sites that cut through what you describe as the largest contiguous Palestinian population in the West Bank, in an effort that includes military deployments, new IDF bases, construction, expropriating land, and your article describes the terrorizing of the local Palestinian population and their daily life. Before we describe exactly what's happening there, let's give it some context. We're talking about an area that in 2005, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had the famous disengagement, right? Most of us think of it as the disengagement from Gaza that led to everything we've gone through from Gaza. But it's important to note that there was more than that. So can you tell us about it and how it relates to your investigation?
Sure. So exactly like you said, when people think nowadays about the disengagement, that was a time when Ariel Sharon evacuated a string of settlements that were deep inside the Palestinian population, people think about the Gaza Strip. But the disengagement had a second half. That's the northern West Bank. That's an area in which there were 4 isolated settlements that about 20 years ago, in 2005, were evacuated. Now, it wasn't too many people, not too many settlers that lived in those places. I think it was about 1,000 settlers that were being evacuated back then. But during those 20 years since, building those settlements, going back to the northern West Bank in their terms, has become a huge political project for the settlements movement.
The purpose of clearing them out in the first place, the purpose of, linking them to the Gaza plan was to kind of leave the door open, leave the window open for a potential Palestinian entity to emerge, right? Because this was a contiguous place.
There have been debates about the rationale and the reasons why Ariel Sharon did that, but at least officially, the explanation that he gave was that those settlements were far, far away from everything else that had to do anything with Israeli settlements. It was an isolated area, a dangerous area. Think about it. We're speaking about the time at the heels of the Second Intifada. So a small group of settlers lived deep inside the Palestinian population that required protection. There were a lot of terror incidents, and Ariel Sharon said that in order to reduce the friction between the populations, they're looking to evacuate those specific 4 settlements.
So the far right wing, which is now represented in our government, made sure that one of their top agenda items, which was basically to roll back the clock, to turn things back, had legislation passed that would open the door, the window, for this to happen. And it involved Gaza and it involved this area of the West Bank, right?
Right. So during those 20 years, they've been building power in order to reverse those actions. It started with activists that were going into areas that became forbidden for Israelis. They amassed political backing. They had backing within the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And then when this current government was sworn in, so we're speaking about the end of 2022, part of the coalition agreements was to amend the disengagement law in a way that would allow Israelis, settlers, to be present, to stay again in those specific places where those 4 settlements that we mentioned once stood. It's one of the first things that this government did. So immediately after the government was sworn in, everybody around here became very busy with everything that had to do with the judicial overhaul. That's Yariv Levin, the justice minister, announced the judicial overhaul in January. In March 2023, when all of us were looking the other way, they passed this amendment in the Knesset. And since then, there's been this ongoing rolling snowball of this project of returning to those areas. It requires some adjustments from the army. It required some adjustments from other bodies of government. We're seeing now the materialization of this entire project on the ground.
And this is personal for some of these far-right politicians. They themselves either had to leave these settlements. They certainly had friends or family. So this wasn't just a theoretical, ideological project. This was a personal desire to return to these settlements. Exactly.
I think it's important to note that I think that for many people in Israel, mostly the seculars, then when you talk about the disengagement is, it's a bit of a small event in history. It's something that I would ask people if they remember it, or even while we were working or after we published this story, people said, right, there was disengagement. Sure. But there is an entire part of the population, the settlers, for which the disengagement was a huge thing. They considered that in their experience, they were being kicked out and displaced from their homes. They lost their homes. There's a big ideological part to it. And many of the let's say, characters, the people that nowadays we see in power in the Israeli system, be it within civil organizations or within ministries, they had some ties in some ways to those settlements that were being evacuated. The deputy speaker of the Knesset, Limor Son Har-Melech, she was evacuated from the settlement Chomesh in the northern West Bank. And one of the main characters, the main power drivers in that entire project that we're seeing now, the head of the Samaria Regional Council, Yossi Dagan, he was evacuated from another settlement, Sanur. And in the same settlement, we have the brother of the very famous Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, is also a minister within the defense ministry. So his brother was also part of the core group that was trying to go back there those entire years.
So 2023, they get this amendment passed, again, while we were all busy demonstrating over the judicial overhaul. And tell us exactly what your investigation has found happened in those years, basically the 3 approximate years between then and now. What has appeared and what are they planning to put there?
So what had happened is that they had to go through a series of steps because of the judicial structure of how the occupation works. They had to go through a series of steps that would allow them to replan, rebuild, and all those things in those areas. The key thing is that for them, it's not just about rebuilding those 4 settlements that were evacuated. They came to a decision to return big time, let's put it this way. So they've been working on establishing 14 more settlements. All of those were issues that were being pushed under this government in waves of approvals for settlements that took place in about the last year or so. And in this project, I think that one of the eureka moments was when we took a map of the area and we started putting all those settlements on a map, and then when we saw all those new settlements that were being approved and we were looking at where those old settlements existed and where we're building them, we started seeing the logic of this big move that is happening.
And what drove you to do this? I mean, take us behind the scenes a little bit of your investigation. How did you and your team decide that this is something that really needed to be looked into, and then maybe move us into how you did it and how you approached the investigation?
It was a combination of strings of thought. I think that a lot of the ideas built and developed over years. It's really a team of reporters. It's me and Matan Golan, the West Bank reporter, Yaniv Kubovich, the IDF reporter. We're the brilliant editor Avi Sharf, and there's an entire team. But going back to how those the ideas developed, so they came from a variety of sources. One thing that we do at the desk, to which I belong, is that we use a lot of satellite imagery, and we try to look at places from afar, to places that we can't reach physically, or that are mostly inaccessible to us.
Your reporting on Gaza was completely dependent on the satellite imagery because you weren't able to go there at all.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been cultivating relationships with various satellite companies around the world. And one of the things that we were planning to look at for quite a long time was 3 refugee camps that are situated in the northern West Bank. Those are places that the IDF has entered at the beginning of January 25 and never left since. And they're also a part of this big story. But to the question of how we came to think about it, so we had this thought of we want to see what's going on over there and how, like, what's the story behind those camps. Another source for this idea was, I think it's very important for us to really listen to what settlers are saying. So I think that about 6 months ago, I bumped into an opinion piece by a known settler activist in which he said that the idea of the settlement movement to return to those areas is driving the IDF to act forcefully in those places, that he tied it, in his words, to what's been happening in those refugee camps. And he was talking about this, linkage between settlements and the IDF. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh, you're really connecting all kinds of events that we've been thinking about them separately. And then going back to the map that I mentioned before, so we had reports also by other colleagues that have been working on other developments in those areas, things that are related to archaeology, for example, a confiscation of land to develop like a certain archaeological site, which when we looked at it on its own, didn't stood out as something too peculiar. But when we put it on this map together with all those other events that were happening, we could see how they create like a network of control in a certain area. So those kind of the ideas developed over time.
So what is actually on the ground now? And how hard was it to find exactly what's going on, and how did you find it?
The work on this project combined various avenues of evidence. We toured the area several times. We spoke with Palestinians. We listened to what settlers have been saying and writing. We approached them. We've been speaking with people in the IDF, in the political system. As I said, information from satellite images. And when we combine all those things, we started to really understand what's happening there. Now, as to what's actually been happening there, first, there's this entire struggle this entire political battle. For the settlers, it focused at the beginning in a settlement called Homesh, the one that we mentioned before. So about almost 20 years ago, really, immediately after it got evacuated, they started a small organization called Homesh First. And their rationale was that in order to reverse reality, go back in time to where we were, that would be the point where things would start unfolding. This is where they were really pointing their energies. During the last years, they had people staying there even before the law was amended. So it means that they stayed there illegally.
A real outpost, or just a couple of people with a tent, or what kind of scale? It
was several dozens. It became... It's not just the people that stay there. Over time, they really enjoyed political backing, and there were like those big marches that included hundreds, I think that at a certain point even thousands of people that went there as a symbolic march. And you had MKs from the Knesset, members of the Knesset, that were touring the place. Several years ago, one of the settlers that was staying there, back then it was an outpost in legal terms, was killed in a terror attack. He was shot to death. And following that, the IDF established a base over there. So all that is happening even before the law was repealed. They built a yeshiva over there. They have housing structures, a paved road. That's a place that we toured. We went to see it with our own very eyes, like to see how it looks. So you have to go in and out quite quickly. During the work on this project, they populated a second major settlement called Sanur. That's the place where the regional council, Yossi Dagan, which is a very interesting character, a brilliant politician, I have to say, with deep ties also in the States. He's been spending a lot of time in Washington. That's where he lives. So we also went to the population ceremony, which was truly a moment for us, like another big eureka moment during this project. When we went there and we didn't know really what to expect. How's it going to look like? Who's going to be there?
So it was like a ceremonial inauguration of the settlement?
They put 16 housing, like mobile homes over there. It was the moment when they say, okay, now we have 16 families. They're going to populate the place. This is the big return moment. We went there, Matan and me and our photographer, Tomer Applebaum. And it was a who's event of the entire rite. And we saw them mixing with the army and the hugs and all that. It's really something that you need to see with your eyes to see like how the relationship looks like. But then to add to that, they had 6 ministers over there. They had the Justice Minister, Yariv Levin. They had the Defense Minister, Israel Katz. They had Chaim Katz. He's a minister that has 4 hats. He's the health and construction, welfare and tourism. And they had Orit Struk, the Minister of Settlements. They had Zev Elkin. He's a minister within the Ministry of Finance. So you had it looked like a cabinet meeting. And they spent a long time over there for about an hour. They sat next to this table and they were taking pictures and they were making all those long speeches, naming everybody that supported it. And we really looked at it and it was, all this power together in this event. That was a moment of we're saying, wow, this is something really big that is happening. Now it's during wartime, right? During this moment, the ministers, Israel Katz, the defense minister, Iman again, and Chaim Katz, they stood and spent time asphyxiating a mezuzah in Yossi Dagan's house. I don't know too many defense ministers that have so much free time on their hands.
During a war.
Exactly. And we were looking at it. Jokes aside, that's a strong signal to how the political system works and the kind of influence that the settlers built over time with a lot of planning ahead inside the governing party in Israel, the Likud, to which Israel Katz and Chaim Katz belong.
Yarden, talk about some of your colleague Matan Golan's reporting on how all of this is affecting the lives of West Bank Palestinians, particularly what your satellite imagery reflects has happened to these refugee camps and what has happened to the Palestinians who made their homes there. And generally, how is it impacting their ability to travel, to move from one place to another, and their quality of life?
So this entire project is a lot of bad news for everybody that resides over there. Let's talk first about Palestinians that live close to those settlements, the ones that exist already. The other ones, some of them are outposts that now become settlements, some of them need to be built, but we already see how it harms and deteriorates the lives of Palestinians over there. It means roadblocks. It means more army present in places that they weren't present before. It means confiscations of land, or even it means that Palestinians are blocked from getting access to their lands. Just imagine what it means for all those Palestinians that live there. They have to share the roads now with the army. And then I'm not even speaking about terror incidents or soldiers shooting someone. It doesn't matter from which side. I'm speaking about even a simple collision, like a traffic collision that happens every day, every place, would jeopardize the lives of Palestinians over there because they would have immediate repercussions coming in their direction because things escalate and somebody miscalculated and all those things. So the entire environment becomes dangerous for them. Also, there are no good neighboring terms over there. Just a few weeks ago, there was a specific event related to the Sanur settlement in which settlers from this specific settlement noticed that Palestinians from a nearby village wanted to bury an elderly Palestinian that passed away. They wanted to bury him in their graveyard, and the settlers came and made them dig out the body as they immediately put it in the grave and made it transfer the body to a different place and dig it somewhere else because it said that they can't do it because they're trying to go into their lands and all those things. So the people that we've been speaking with, they're terrified. They're very concerned that things might happen to their children. Basically, in those last 20 years, compared to other parts of the West Bank, over there was less violence. It was calmer compared. Yeah, everything is relative. But it's about 700,000 Palestinians that didn't have to confront settlers in their daily lives, and now all this is coming. So the potential for some kind of an explosion in those areas just like increasing by the day.
The satellite images of what's happened to the refugee camps in that particular area were reminiscent of the things that you were showing us in Gaza, weren't they?
Yeah.
What happens to those people? I mean, really it just shows like complete destruction and evacuation of the refugee camps that were there, and those were large camps.
So the story with the refugee camps, there's like an ongoing chronology of how things were moving there. Back in 2022, there was a string of terror attacks in the West Bank, also in Israel. The army started reacting very forcefully in those areas. That's even before October 7th. That's before the current government. The army increased the usage of force in those areas. It was going into the more of like wartime tools that were being employed. After October 7th, there was the entire trauma in Israel and also a change of doctrine within the IDF that they speak about internally that increased, like everything, like the amount of force that we're using went up another step. And then they went into those 3 refugee camps, places where indeed Hamas and Jihad acted over years. Jenin refugee camp inhabited a lot of militants, and that they went in and displaced over 32,000 Palestinians that lived in those 3 refugee camps. That's Jenin, Tulkarem, and Nur Shams. 32,000 according to UNRWA, that's the number. And they never let them return. And then the army employed something that, as part of this new doctrine, they call it reshaping the landscape. Those are the terms. What it practically means is really using a lot of tactics from Gaza, which was demolishing hundreds of buildings. They created those long, wide roads inside the camp for military usage. Basically, and this is something that we heard officers within the army saying, is that the goal was to create, and they did so, they really paved the road that cuts through each one of those 3 refugee camps with the goal of being able to have 2 tanks go through those camps next to each other, 2 tanks, to minimize the risk for soldiers in case they would need to go in there. And this is still something that is still happening. The connection between the refugee camps and what that we've seen with this entire resettling the area move is a process in which the rationale of the army, the post-October 7th rationale, has been aligning with the long-term goals of settlers in those areas.
Bezalel Smotrich explicitly said that these were part of the war objectives. He directly linked what was happening to those refugee camps to the Gaza war.
Yeah, he says so. So at the beginning of 2025, he said that acting in those places was added to the war goals as a demand by his party, the religious right. Bezalel Smotrich is not the minister that makes the calls about entering Jenin in that way or not, but we do see this process in which long-term goals aligned with rationales that the army was developing over time, and then they met, and this definitely serves those goals of the settlers over there.
So these were their goals before the Gaza war and before October 7th, but it may have acted as some sort of a catalyst, and at certain points, Netanyahu was making concessions to Trump on Gaza, and our West Bank correspondents, first Hagar Shazaf and then also Matan Golan on the podcast, were talking about how some of these far-right elements felt like they were getting compensated in the West Bank for allowing Trump to move forward with his plans for Gaza, which they weren't too happy about.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are new bases in this area for the IDF, or they're just in planning stages?
Oh, there are plenty. Once the government decided about resettling those places, once the government approved those 18 settlements, and this becomes official policy, so the IDF's being tasked with implementing those policies. So it means protecting settlers over there. According to our count, there are 8 bases. So let's count the 3 refugee camps as bases because the army is still residing in them. We know that the army is building a base on a hill overlooking the Jenin refugee camp. And in addition to all of those, so there's a base in Homesh. Back then, we discussed it earlier. There's a new base in Sanur, which is 50 meters from the settlers' homes. We know that there's a base which is being constructed as we're speaking next to Ganim settlement. This is one of the settlements that was evacuated back then. There's another big base in a place called Tel Dotan. There are plenty of bases. So we see a lot of military investment in this entire project.
Your piece sort of reflected 2 minds, I suppose, according to Yaniv's reporting, our military correspondent, by the IDF towards what's going on there in this project. Some of the unnamed sources he quoted expressed misgivings about, not enough direct IDF involvement in planning all of this. And others, I guess, as a result of increasing appointments of ideologically far-right and settler-minded senior officials in the IDF are much more enthusiastically implementing it. It sort of seems like there's some in the army who aren't crazy about what's happening and others who are very much behind it.
So first of all, I think the voices that Yaniv brought and that are really quoted, those are high-ranking officers that are saying that this is being done over the head of the IDF, that the IDF did not voice its opinion about what is happening there, the implications, right? The IDF is not saying whether it's good or not. The IDF is staying away from politics, but that's the official line. That's always is, and that's it's not the rule. But the IDF is supposed to give a professional opinion about something which is that big. It's basically changing the entire way in which the IDF operates inside the West Bank.
With huge security implications.
Exactly. It's a huge thing. It's not just building those bases. It means that they're going to need to protect the roads, and they're going to need to collect intelligence, and they're going to need to, in case that there's there's some kind of escalation, they'll need to protect people around there. There's going to be retaliation. So it's a big deal. And the IDF is basically saying that they were not consulted. They haven't properly voiced, they weren't asked to properly voice their opinions about the implications of this entire project. Aside from that, that's something that we try to characterize in the piece, was that the IDF and the settlers movement, in some parts, we can see them becoming more and more tied together. So we noted, for example, the head of Central Command. He's the head of Central Command. That's Avi Blut. That's the highest ranking IDF officer in the West Bank. He's the person responsible for the West Bank. He's a person that grew up in a settlement. His deputy is also a person that grew up in a settlement. We're not saying that those are the people making the decisions about whether settlements should return to a certain place or not. Those are decisions that are being made by the political echelons, right? So it's by the government approves that, but we're trying to point at some sociological change within the IDF. And we can see that those specific officers, they're rising to quite high ranks with a lot of authority. And that's also very concerning.
So this is rolling back, presumably, Ariel Sharon's decision in 2005. If you sort of widen out the goals of this, it seems like it's also to go back to the days before Oslo. Most of these moves are in direct violation of the Oslo Accords, right?
Part of the stated long-term goals of settlers are to dismantle the Oslo Accords. Bezalel Smotrich is calling for that. We see on-the-ground activities with all those outposts that received a lot of headlines, all this violence happening in the West Bank that gets a lot of violence in recent months. Those are outposts, and we can see them venturing into places that they're not supposed to go into according to the Oslo Accords. We don't see those settlements that we're discussing now being built in places that the Oslo Accords forbidden. Right? That's not the case. They're still in those sea areas, like if you want to go into details. But we definitely see how it's all part of a drive to dismantle those accords. The fact that the disengagement law was reversed, was repealed in those areas, in the North and West Bank, allowed for settlers to stay in those areas. Some of them used that permission to build an outpost exactly at the edges of where Israelis are allowed to stay. And from there, they're venturing into those places that are forbidden according to the Oslo Accords. And that's really chipping away at the Accords and what they allow.
Everything on this podcast lately seems to come down to the upcoming elections in the fall. Do you think really that the results of the election, should there be a different government in place, can really halt, change, or even reverse what's happening there? Or does the momentum seem too strong to you? And the second part of my final question is, if this government is reelected and continues, what do you foresee as further movements towards kind of entrenching what they've begun here?
If a new government will be elected, I don't think we should be naive, and I don't think that the next government is going to end the occupation. That's not what's on the table. But as a best case scenario, if a new government would come in with a different perspective towards all this, the best case scenario, they would slow down the planning of some of those settlements that haven't materialized yet. They were approved, but they need to be planned, and they need to be built. So Homesh and Sanur, they exist, and a few others, but there's a bunch more like Ta'anach and Ma'ayanot and Alonei Shomron. They still don't exist on the ground. We toured where they should, they're supposed to be built.
They exist on the maps.
Now, those planning processes, they take time, and each one of them, just think about it, each one of them, in case that it will be built, it would harm Palestinians around it. It would deteriorate the situation. It's going to have strategic implications, and it will be very hard to remove it when the day comes for a Palestinian-Israeli agreement, right? So the best case scenario for the next government, and that's quite important, it's a really big deal, would be for it to slow down the processes that we now see moving ahead. And I think that a lot of the settlers involved in this project right now, they understand it, and why there's a sprint on their side, on their behalf, to, create facts on the ground, as they say, as fast as possible. Now, if the current government stays in power, they're going to be pushing ahead. This government is already the settlers' government. We see settlers in key positions. We saw everything that took place in those last almost 4 years. They have stated goals. They have stated goals about breaking the Oslo Accords. They have stated goals about annexing the West Bank. That's part of it. They've been also lobbying Washington. So it's a big question also who stays in power and what will happen also in the midterms and then afterwards in the states. So, for example, Bezalel Smotrich in a recent speech saying that as a goal for the next government should encourage voluntary immigration of Palestinians from the West Bank, because in the long term, there's no other solution. Those are his words. So that's what's at stake. Those are the goals that they are vocally advocating for. And I think that the coming elections in Israel, those are really, really crucial elections.
As if we needed another reason for them to be crucial elections. There's a long list. This is an incredible investigation. I encourage everyone to read it. I know it took months, even years in the making. So congratulations on it. And we'll look for your next project. It's not, always pleasant or encouraging information for us to get, but it's very important to have and to know what's going on there in the West Bank, especially at a time when we're so focused on other parts of the region and other Israeli borders. Yarden Michaeli, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and thanks for your hard work.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And that wraps things up for the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my producer and editor, Adi Shacham, and to my guest, Yarden Michaeli. If you like the podcast and you want to continue to listen, don't forget to subscribe to us and follow us on Spotify, on Apple, on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so inclined, leave us a comment or a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, and to read investigations like the one Yarden just talked about, please subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.